This is the time set for the meeting of the Board of Waterworks Trustees, April 28th, 2020. Michelle, this is a Zoom meeting. Can you please take roll so I know which board members are on?
Sure. Ashburn?
Present.
Bolton?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear him respond.
Can you hear me? I'm here.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Hello.
Andrea Bolton?
Here.
Graham Gillette?
Here.
Sue Hubbard?
Here.
And Diane Munns, of course.
Here. All right. We have the decision agenda before us. Item 1 is the consent agenda consisting of the minutes, financial statements, payments for March 2020, CEO approved expenditures in excess of $20,000 and approval of the next meeting date. Ted, do you have any comments on the consent agenda?
I do not, Diane, unless there are questions.
I will entertain a motion that we approve the items in the consent agenda.
So moved. This is Andrea.
Second, Sue.
It's been moved and second for approval of the items in the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Item 2 is public comment period. Do we have any members of the public who would like to make comment at this time? If so, please state your name.
Diane, before we go on, as an observer, I thought all board members voted in favor of that, but I couldn't tell exactly.
Would it be easier if we took roll calls on these things?
I think maybe we should for each vote.
Okay. Michelle, you want to go back and do that?
Yes, for the consent agenda, Ashburn?
Yes.
Bolton?
Yes.
Gillette?
Yes.
Hubbard?
Yes.
Munns?
Yes.
Thank you.
For item 2, public comment period, are there any members of the public who would like to make comment at this time? Hearing none, we will close that out and go on to the action items for this month. The first one is to request authorization to solicit bids for the 2020 well rehabilitation, Mcmullen water treatment plant. Ted, do you want to take us through this and then I'll get a motion?
Yes, absolutely. Well rehabilitation on our radial collector wells is something that needs to be done periodically. It's an operational maintenance item. So when the budget was prepared for this particular project, it included well rehab on wells 2 and 3, basically cleaning the wells to restore their capacity. It also included installation of replacement lateral screens in well 5 and well 6. When those 2 wells were rehabilitated a couple of years ago, we discovered that there were well screens that had been damaged in those wells. So the original budget was for the base bid item, well 2 and 3 rehab, and for alternate 2 and alternate 3. That was in the budget. As we moved through the design process, we thought it was prudent to include a couple of additional alternates in the package. Alternates 2A and 3A are essentially well rehab. It's called lateral development in the memo, but once we're down there and we've cleaned the case on, we have the thing offline, and we've entered the case on to install these screens. We thought that we might be able to get a rehab done for a very competitive price. We also were thinking that there might be good prices at this point in time. We don't know what the work environment is like. We don't know if we'll get good or bad, but we thought that while we're out bidding and we have work that needs to be done there, we would go ahead and maximize our budget and maximize the flexibility. So We added a couple of additional things. We also added the potential for rehab of well number 1, just to see if we get great bids, we'll have opportunity to kind of pick and choose a little bit. So this project originally intended to rehab wells 2 and 3, or clean them, clean the laterals, and install the new screens in 5 and 6 has been expanded in scope a little bit with the intention of bringing back to you next month our award for recommendation on just which pieces of this project we will do. So we would request that the board authorize staff to solicit bids for the well rehab project.
Can I have a motion?
So moved. This is Andrea.
Second, from Joel.
Are there any questions for Ted?
I have a question, not necessarily on this, but as we are seeing some bids coming back during this climate, are we thinking about any other projects that maybe weren't listed as a priority to get done right now, but maybe it might be in our best interest to get done right now if we see that bids are coming in much lower than usually anticipated?
Yeah, you know, we're looking at a lot of things, Andrea, because we don't know exactly what to expect. On the one hand, there might be some opportunity if contractors are available. Most of our construction projects are continuing, so we don't expect it to be incredibly dramatic. But on the other hand, we've got some expenses, and until we know whether we're going to get reimbursement from FEMA, we're sort of holding off. We're holding back some projects so that we have money that we can move around. So we're kind of considering the whole scope of potential for good bids and potential for additional costs, and trying to manage all of that as we go through the bidding process.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? It's been moved and seconded to authorize staff to solicit bids for 2020 well rehabilitation at the Mcmullen water treatment plant, and establish the date of public hearing as the date of the May 2020 board meeting. Michelle, will you do a roll call vote?
Ashburn,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
We didn't hear you, Sue.
Yes.
thank you. Munns.
Yes.
Okay.
Item 3B, authorization for CEO and general manager to execute professional service agreements with Jacobs for 2020 Scada system evaluation. Ted, will you tell us what this is about?
Yes, this Scada system review RFP went to planning this month. Mike McKernan did a nice job of presenting information about our Scada system, or our supervisory control and data acquisition system. This is essentially the computer system that allows us to monitor and operate, control, if you will, our treatment plants and all of our remote facilities, and to communicate with all of those facilities. That system was initially commissioned after the flooding in 1993. Our control center was destroyed, and so we moved to a new computerized system. And that system has literally been added onto and expanded and enhanced and upgraded continuously ever since then. So frankly, the time is just right for us to take a kind of a comprehensive look at that system and its stability, the security, everything as a whole. So we issued this RFP. We budgeted this project for the year. We got 5 responses to the RFP from very reputable, very qualified consultants, all national consultants, and they all gave us very responsive proposals. A team that consisted of representatives from our engineering department, water production, and IT reviewed the 5 proposals. They narrowed it down to 2, those 2 being Jacobs and HDR, and then they gave those two teams an opportunity to do a 1-hour video presentation here recently to highlight their proposal and answer some of our questions. After that opportunity to do the presentation, the team met again and refined their scoring, and ultimately they did select Jacobs. Michelle, can you scroll down just a little bit there so we can see the prices? As it turned out, Jacobs was the low bidder, but that was certainly not the only consideration. There were a number of other considerations, and one of the things that really put them over the top for the team was their focus on cybersecurity and what we could do to enhance that. So I think we've got a good price here from a quality company. Jacobs is somebody we've worked with before. The former CH2M Hill, who we did a lot of work with, is now part of Jacobs, and the project manager on this project has worked with us a number of times before. So we're very happy with the bids and would recommend that the board authorize execution of this agreement.
I'll entertain a motion, and then Ted can take questions about this project.
So moved, Sue.
Seconded. This is Andrea.
Are there questions for Ted? I have a quick question. Those bids were significantly different. Was it, I mean, what was it that made the difference?
You know, some of it, Diane, you can see the level of effort in hours right above the costs. So like Stanley was looking at 1,600 hours of effort. Jacobs thought they could do it in less time. They had some unique software that they think will help them. I might ask Mike if he might want to respond a little bit to the reasoning for the difference in bids there. Mike, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I thought I was muted by others, so I was patiently waiting. Sorry for the delay there. You're right on track there, Ted. Each of these consultants had to estimate the number of hours they thought that it would take. So that's a key part of why you see some differences in hours and pricing. Jacobs was like Howard R. Green. They were kind of the lower. They thought they could do this with fewer hours. At least the Jacobs team had I'll call it a more tangible reason for thinking they could do it in less hours. They have a approach on the cyber side where they intend to plug into our network and listen. And they think that that will allow them to garner information about our network in advance of some of the field work. That was kind of something that was distinctly different about Jacobs. So, and it was also an item that, you know, in the end, the internal review team thought was an appropriate way to do the work, or at least we didn't object to it. So,
Other questions? Okay, we have a motion to authorize staff to execute a professional service agreement with Jacobs in the amount of $149,980 for the 2020 Scada system evaluation. Michelle, please do a roll call vote.
Ashburner,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
and Munns.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, item 3C, authorization for CEO and general manager to execute change order number 6 to 2015 to 2020 lime residuals disposal agreements with Sinagro. Ted?
Yeah, this the agreement that we have with Sinagro to haul our sludge was very much informed by our historic experience with sludge hauling contractors, and not just the contractor who we recently had to cancel our contract with, but other contractors who did the work very successfully. But the contract that we have with Senegro is very prescriptive. It's very tight in terms of when we will pay them the money for moving the sludge off of our property and to its ultimate beneficial use or final use. And specifically, the sludge that is removed from the lagoons at the Mcmullen water treatment plant, there is no allowance for paying Senegro anything for removing the material from the lagoon. They have to move it on off of our property and move it towards beneficial use before we pay them anything. That being the case, there's really no incentive for them to remove the material quickly all at one time. There's actually incentive for them to remove it very slowly so that they can just move it completely through their pipeline of operation and get it to beneficial use or its final resting place as quickly as possible so they can get paid. Well, that has turned out to not be very effective for Des Moines Waterworks, because what the result is that the lagoon sits out of service for a year or more while they're kind of nibbling away at the material in there. What we would really like for them to do is get into the lagoon when it's full, remove all of the material at one time, stockpile it on site so that it can be drying further, which is a tremendous benefit to us because it weighs less and we're paying them by the ton. And then kind of nibble away at that pile that they've created on our property. So what we want to do here is actually a no-cost change order, where we want to modify the payment method so that we will actually pay them a portion of their fee per ton to just simply move the material out of the lagoon and stockpile it on the property. Return the lagoon to service, which is a great benefit to us because then we can start using it right away. And then allow the material to dry. So we're going to pay them a small or a percentage of the fee. We're going to require them to have the lagoon cleaned out in 2021. And then we're going to give them 2022 and 2023 to move that material to its ultimate final destination so they can get the rest of their payment. The contract was originally set up so that it automatically extended for 2 years at the end from 2020 to 2022. That really isn't enough time for them to clean up that stockpile, so we are going to give them 1 more year. That's what we're proposing through 2023. So this does not increase the price that we pay per ton of sludge removed at all. It benefits us dramatically in our operation of the Mcmullen plant and through the continued drying of that material as it sits on site for a couple of years. And it also ensures that Senegro will be able to get the rest of their money for taking the material to ultimate beneficial use by giving them that extra year. So we think it's a positive move based on our experience, and we would ask that the board authorize the change order.
Can I have a motion in a second, and then we will take questions?
Move staff recommendation.
Second, Sue.
Questions for Ted? Ted, I have one. Was a little confused, and you've negotiated all this with Senegro already?
We have discussed it with them, yes. I did not, Diane actually, but Des Moines Waterworks staff, primarily Mike McKernan and Kyle Danley, have discussed all of this with Senegro, clearly with the understanding that it would need to be approved by the board before any of it happened. But yes, we've discussed it with them.
And it's acceptable to them?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Any other questions? It's been moved and seconded that we authorize the CEO and general manager to approve the change order number 6 to the 2015 to 2020 lime residuals disposal agreement. Michelle, please take a roll call vote.
Ashburner,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Muns.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item 3D, this is the transfer of ownership of breakers and switches at the Fluor Drive Water Treatment Plant to Mid-American Energy. Tad?
Yes, this is a real golden opportunity for us, I must say, and it just sort of dropped in our lap. But the substation at the Fluor Drive plant has been in place since the 1950s. And in all of that time, there's been this line of demarcation between what Mid-Am owned and what we owned. And that line of demarcation was in a very unusual spot because the line put several high voltage, 69,000 volt switches and circuit breakers on our side of the line and made us responsible for that very high voltage equipment, something that we don't have a lot of contact with nor experience with, and frankly have little business dealing with that high of a voltage. It's very much a utility type of voltage. Well, Mid-American has actually approached us and offered that they will upgrade or actually replace all of the 69,000 volt equipment on our side of that line of demarcation. And once it's all been replaced at their cost, they will take ownership of that or effectively move that line of demarcation to the transformer where the power is transformed down from 69,000 volts to our normal 4160 volt that we use. They will do that at no cost to us and take responsibility for the ongoing operation and maintenance of the high voltage switch gear or switches in our substation. If we will give them an easement to do that, to facilitate the completion of the work and the future ownership, which we already believe that the easement they have will accommodate that, but we're going to review that. And if it needs to be adjusted in any way, we will adjust it. We will bring that back to you as a board to grant them additional easement if that's necessary, and we're still reviewing that. And they want us to sunset a 1965 vintage service agreement that we have with them that, as Mike says here, serves no effective purpose because it's been superseded by numerous agreements since 1965 related to our generator and curtailment and the new rate agreements that we have and all of the energy efficiency things that they've done over the years. There's just an old agreement out there that is no longer it serves no purpose, I think is the way to put it. They want to officially sunset that. So we believe that this is a very positive agreement for Des Moines Waterworks. Mid-American just thinks that all will be better served if they are responsible for those switches, and we agree completely, and we would ask that the board authorize this agreement.
Can I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved. This is Andrea.
I'll second it, Graham.
Questions for Tad on this? It's been moved and seconded to authorize the CEO and general manager to execute the Mid-American Energy Company proposal and to proceed with any easement expansions if needed to support transfer and ownership of 69,000 volt circuit breakers and switches and associated facilities to Mid-American Energy Company, and to set and give notice of public hearing related thereto if needed. Michelle, please take a roll call vote.
Ashburner,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Muns.
Yes. Item 3E, COVID-19 response. Ted?
Yeah, there's a lot here, but I would like to take the time to kind of step through it because there is a lot here and it's very timely and it's changing all the time. But based on the board's authorization of our COVID-19 emergency response plan last month, we have implemented a number of temporary policies, and I just want to walk through those for you so that you have an understanding of what we have done and are doing and intend to do, and can ask questions if you have any. First of all, related to parks and park events, both Waterworks Park and Maffitt Reservoir Park remain open to the public. Restrooms, playgrounds, some of those kind of things have been closed, but the parks are open. We've signed the bridge in Waterworks Park to try to prevent congregating there, and that's working pretty well, actually. Park events through all of April and much of May have been canceled. We are refunding fees associated with all of those canceled events. We don't have any concerts scheduled now until July at the amphitheater, but we do still have some scheduled for July, August, and September, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end of the meeting here. We've suspended the permit requirement for boats on Maffitt Reservoir because the main office is closed and that's where permits are picked up. So basically the parks are open for use, but there aren't any scheduled events, and that is working well. I have to say the park is probably as crowded as I have ever seen it on a daily basis. From a customer service perspective, the main office remains closed to walk-in customers. We are still not doing any in-home customer service unless it's an emergency. We are sending termination notices to customers on a regular basis, but there is a note on the notice that says we will not be terminating because of the pandemic, but we want them to be advised of what they owe so that they have a sense of what's going on. We have not been doing pre-termination courtesy calls. We kind of suspended that process, but we're giving a little thought to reinitiating the process, but with a message that says something more along the lines of, hey, please reach out and set up a pay agreement. You don't have to pay the whole thing. We'd be happy to work with you, and please contact us. Late fees continue to be applied, and that is our plan going forward, that we will assess late fees to customers who haven't made pay arrangements. And to be clear, customers can call in and make pay arrangements to pay a lesser amount than they owe, and when they make those arrangements, then we can work with them. We do intend to place liens at the end of the month, as we typically would. Many utilities lien properties for past due amounts on active services. We do not do that. We lien properties that have been finalized, where in most cases the customers are no longer there and they've left and they haven't paid their unpaid charges. And so we lien those unpaid charges for services that are inactive. And we do intend to continue doing that once accounts have been finalized, or if they've been finalized. Just to give a little perspective, based on the fact that we are not terminating service right now, revenue remains fairly steady, which is good. Delinquent amounts owed on residential accounts, our retail residential accounts, has increased 20% though, over a month ago. And that's a fairly significant increase in our accounts receivable. That is specifically residential on our retail customers. The good news is that if we look at our total accounts receivable, which would include, in addition to residential, commercial, industrial, and wholesale, the accounts receivable has only increased about 4% across all of our services. And if we just look at water service and don't consider the services that we bill for other people, it's just about a 1% increase in our accounts receivable over a month ago. So revenue is steady, at least for the first month. That's positive, and we're pleased by that. Since we suspended terminations, we have canceled 3,627 disconnects About 90% of those customers had at least one disconnect notice in the last 12 months, but about 10% of those customers had not had a disconnect notice in the last 12 months, and so they're likely new customers to our delinquent list. So that gives you a little perspective on where we're at with customer service, at least today, and we'll give you another update next month. We have also done a number of things related to employee health and safety, and what I'd really like to do here is go to the policy, Michelle. Yes. We'll just walk really quickly through these things so you have a sense, so you can ask any questions you might have. First of all, related to employees with serious or chronic medical conditions, early on in the pandemic, the CDC issued this list of conditions that make folks more susceptible or potentially more susceptible to infection. So at that time, right away, we allowed employees to basically self-diagnose if they had one of these conditions, and we allowed them to take time off and use their sick leave if they felt that they were at risk and wanted to stay home. Then on the 1st of April, when the Families First Act went into effect, everyone effectively had 80 hours of COVID sick leave that they could use, and they could use it if they felt that they were in one of these high-risk categories. And so we transitioned them from their normal sick leave to the COVID sick leave, and we allowed them to use that. Now, once they used that entire 80 hours, in addition to whatever sick leave they had used before, when they got to the end of their COVID sick leave, we shared with them that we would accommodate them staying home if they continued to feel that that was necessary. But we were hoping that they would come back, and we were trying to get everyone back in a way that they can social distance and practice appropriate hygiene. But if they didn't feel comfortable coming back, we would accommodate them staying home, but it would need to be on vacation or floating holiday, not sick leave. And so most of our folks have come back. I don't believe we have anyone who chose to stay home on vacation, but we would certainly accommodate that if that was a decision that they felt was appropriate for them. On the next page, Michelle, we'll talk a little bit about
Ed, can I ask a question here?
Absolutely.
So I don't think you've had any employees that have COVID.
We have an employee whose spouse tested positive, and now the employee and the other members of the household are all symptomatic, but they won't test them because they're just assuming that they're positive. So I would say we do have one.
Okay, so if they exhausted sick leave because they were a member of that and their 80 hours, then what do they go to?
If they're sick, Diane, they can always use their sick leave if they're truly sick. So that would be the first thing. And most of our employees have have a sick leave balance available. But if they exhausted all of their sick leave and the 80 hours of COVID leave that was the result of the Families First Act, then they could use vacation and personal time, or floating holiday, I guess we call it now. And then if they exhausted all of that, then they would go into no pay status, I believe. Doug, am I correct there?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the employees with serious health conditions?
Ted, what about folks with school-age kids? Are you seeing many issues with employees trying to take care of their kids who are in school? Or has most everybody found some kind of arrangement?
Doug, you want me to take a swing at that? Looks like you're muted there, but Joel, we are seeing a fair number of folks take advantage of the extension of FMLA. FMLA has been extended to allow people to take time off to care for children who are home because their school or daycare has closed. And we have maybe 10 employees who have applied for that, but most of them are taking it intermittently. You know, they're exchanging time with their spouse, or they're, working from home and taking a few hours at a time to manage their children's studies. But we do have a couple who don't have the option of working from home and don't really have any other options, and they're full time on the emergency FMLA, which pays them 2/3 of their normal salary up to a certain cap. And then we allow them to supplement that with sick leave to get a full check if that's what they'd like to do.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's talk a little bit about employees who are ill or exhibiting symptoms. And this is pretty straightforward, but it's in the policy, so we'll just show you. Basically, the bottom line is if you're sick, stay home. If you become sick at work, notify your supervisor, distance yourself from other folks. Wear a mask if you can't immediately leave. But the bottom line is if folks are sick, we want to know. We want them to be safe and be home and be self-quarantined so they can get better. And of course, we want them to charge the appropriate time. So if employees are sick, they'll use sick leave. And then there are some return to work restrictions. Michelle, if you can scroll down a little bit, we talk about return to work. Basically, we want them to be symptom-free for 7 days, or at least 7 days have passed since symptoms first appeared, and all their other symptoms have improved. So we've got some return to work requirements there. But as Diane asked earlier, we've only had one employee who has been symptomatic, so we haven't had a lot of call to use that. Employees who have known exposure, very similar thing, notify the supervisor, stay at home. That's exactly what happened with the employee that we have who's now symptomatic. They had a spouse who was positive, tested positive. They stayed home as requested, and now they're symptomatic, and we're hopeful that they didn't expose any other employees. So our distancing worked very well in that case. They had very little contact with other employees, even the days they were here. And then they weren't symptomatic for a number of days. Now they are. We're hopeful that we're going to get past that without any other infections. Out-of-state travel, all the way back around spring break, the governor recommended that Iowans who returned home after travel self-quarantine for 14 days. We implemented a similar policy. At that time, because people had left without knowing, we allowed them to come back and charge their time to a special project number. But effective on the 29th of March, we told them if you choose to travel, non-essential travel, it will be allowed, but you have to self-quarantine for 14 days when you get home. Fortunately, we haven't had a lot of employees who wanted or needed to travel, so I don't know that we've even had to implement this, but it is still in place. It's probably something that we will, one of the first things that we will lift in terms of these employee health and safety policies, but for now it's still in place, and we talk about it on a regular basis and whether it's still appropriate. But as things continue to move, we'll probably lift that a little bit. Remote work and telecommuting. I like to say that these are just good common sense policies. We do have 42 employees who are working from home on a regular basis every day. And basically, we want them to be productive when they're at home. We want them to use Waterworks equipment appropriately, protect our computer systems, try to create a reasonable workspace at home so they can be productive and take care of themselves and let us know if they become ill. But pretty much just common sense policies there related to work from home. We do have a statement in here about performing tasks outside of normal work duties. We had some employees who just their work wasn't available right now. We're trying to get everybody back to work. So we have brought some some folks back, specifically some field customer service folks, and asked them to do some work in the park. And they've been great about it. They've been very productive and very happy to do it. And we really appreciate that. And we also really appreciate the union's flexibility to allow that kind of thing. It has allowed us to get the vast majority of our folks back to work and productive, so we can continue to meet our mission. Driving utility vehicles home, here again, we've got 38 people who are taking Waterworks vehicles home on a daily basis. That allows them to report directly to work. They don't have to go into the plant, which is still sequestered, to get their vehicle. They don't have to congregate in the garage to pick up a vehicle in the morning. It's just a protective measure, but we've implemented some real common sense policies here. Driving directly to and from work, not using the vehicle for errands or personal use, no passengers in the vehicle, and then of course just reasonable standard of care, lock it up, park it in a safe place. We've had no problems with that, and it's been very effective. And then lastly, related to our Des Moines Waterworks specific policies, is this working in the office and the field. We do have a number of people who they need to come in every day. If they're working in the field, they can't work from home. There's a few tasks in the office that we can't effectively do from home. So we do have a number of folks still coming in every day. And we're just asking them to practice social distancing and good pandemic hygiene when they are at work. So those are our Waterworks specific policies. There is also a policy that we've implemented on the next page, Michelle, the COVID-19 emergency paid sick leave. There are 6 qualifying reasons that you can qualify for this. Basically, if you're sick or caring for someone else who's sick, or if you have a child who's home because their school or daycare is closed. And we've put together a multi-page policy to implement the requirements of that Families First Act, and that's in your board packet. And then so is the emergency family and medical leave policy, which extended FMLA to allow folks to care for children who are home because their school or daycare is closed. And there again, that is a 3-page policy that very much parallels the federal requirements. And then lastly, we have our memorandum of understanding with the union that just defined how sequestered employees would be paid and how their vacation leave would be handled if they exceeded their maximums while they were sequestered. So that's a really high level flyover of our policies. Does anybody have any questions about any of those?
I do, Ted. It's just kind of more a question on this, ever-changing testing system. It's my understanding now we have plenty of tests, and they are wanting to test people through this Test Iowa if they do have symptoms.
Right.
But I heard you say what I've also heard, and that is that if people have, if there's someone in the family, they assume that they had it. But I'm curious, and maybe it's a Doug question. What are you hearing, whether it's from the CDC or the Department of Public Health? Are we just assuming people have it, or should we be having tests?
Doug, do you want to take a swing at that?
And I heard the governor say today, we have plenty of tests, over 6,000 tests. They have this Test Iowa thing now that they've paid $26 million to ensure that anyone who has symptoms, so we can track it. What concerns me is when we see these numbers like we're seeing, and then I hear there's an employee whose wife has it and the whole family is symptomatic. I want those numbers counted as an Iowan. I'm not saying as Des Moines Waterworks, I'm just saying it doesn't seem like we're really tracking our state.
Sue, I had the same exact thoughts as you did whenever I heard that. That was my first red flag that went up. Granted, I agreed this isn't a waterworks issue, but it still was very disconcerting to hear that.
Yeah, I think we're just assuming in this case that the employee is positive. We're not requiring that she or he be tested. There's nothing like that we've put in place. So I'm not really sure how else to really respond to that, quite honestly.
Well, and the decision to test or not certainly wasn't ours, but the feedback we got from the employee was that they were symptomatic and they contacted public health and they said, yeah, we assume that you have it. Now, that, I honestly, Sue, the Test Iowa thing is so new, I don't know. I don't recall how that communication to us aligned with the launch of the Test Iowa thing, because I think this weekend was the first time they tested. Test Iowa might have been Saturday was the first day.
Right.
So it may well be that if she logged in and filled out the paperwork, that they could get the family tested. But I don't know. We can certainly ask the question though, and ask the employee if they've logged into that, but I don't know that we could require them to as the water works. We could certainly ask about it as concerned Iowans though.
Yeah, I'm more interested from a public health, because what I hear the governor saying on these daily press conferences, and then, you know, what I hear from individuals about, well, I'm being told this. I have 3 questions into the Polk County Health Department, Iowa Department of Public Health, and Governor's Office, you know, for my full-time job. And I want to see if the questions come back consistent. But this one raises a real red flag if someone's telling, whether it's a private physician or Polk County Health or whomever is saying, oh, your whole family, we just assume you have it, and we're not counting them. I think we don't get to the contact tracing and everything else. I know the employee has not worked since April 17th, but who's to say the rest of the family hasn't been walking into Hy-Vee or going to, you know, the post office? So it's just a public health question.
Understood. And I'd have to go back to the timing, and I don't know when they were told to just stay home. But we can follow up on that, find out.
Any other questions?
And Ted, I don't need a response back. I just would really like us to have us being Iowans a consistent process, and I don't see that.
Understood and agree. One last thing, Diane, I just want to point out about the sequestered employees. We talked a little bit about the cost associated with that last month. And I want to report that the initial cost of sequestration for each 2-week rotation, the initial 2-week rotations was about $300,000 for each 2-week rotation, plus about $50,000 of initial setup and prep to get the folks ready to live there. So the first 4 weeks, when we had a larger number of folks sequestered there, cost about $650,000. Since then, we've reduced the number of folks who are sequestered. Currently, there are 11 folks sequestered, 8 hourly folks and 3 exempt employees. The cost there is about $80,000 a week. So the time we crafted this memo is about $730,000 total. That was about 5 weeks worth. And then we'll have another week probably in the $80,000 range. And then it's likely that we will further reduce as we're learning about pandemic hygiene and how to separate folks and how to ensure continuity. We keep kind of turning this down a little bit, trying to balance cost with protection. We think we're getting a pretty good handle on it now. So that gives you a sense of where we are and where we're going related to sequestering. And that's kind of it in terms of our COVID-19 overview. So what we would like is we'll answer any questions, and then it asks the board to once again ratify the plan with the understanding that we'll have another report next month.
Right.
I move to ratify the COVID-19 Emergency Action Plan.
Second, Sue.
Any further questions on that? Ted, we really appreciate the ongoing update as to what's happening and an opportunity to pass on that. There's good thought in this, and I know that it's a constantly changing environment that you're needing to respond to.
It is. I just want to point out that the director team is literally meeting every single day virtually at 10 o'clock every morning to talk about what's changed in the last 24 hours and what should we do differently and how do we communicate that to the employees and the board. And it's been a real team effort, and the team is to be applauded.
Ed, regarding the sequestered employees, I hate to ask you to predict the future, but I just want to get a sense of what you think kind of, where this will go. Is there any outlook of ending the sequester and just kind of having them operate at, a socially distant manner and using some other protections? What's kind of the outlook looking a couple months ahead?
Ooh, a couple months is a long time, but I will say this. We've talked a lot already about, what's the next step. And I think the next step is going to look like still having our control center operators sequestered. So that would be like 4 people in total. And we're looking at ways to separate them from maintenance and provide them some areas that they only use and nobody else goes into those areas, but we can kind of function from a maintenance and operations perspective around them and outside of those areas. And so I think that's the next step. And then just exactly how long we will continue to ask them to stay in 2-week stints is a little harder for me to predict, but I think we're actually learning a lot. We're learning a lot about how contagious this is and how to protect people and how to social distance. And, we've become comfortable with suspending sequestration at the other plants. And just this week, we started allowing deliveries of non-chemical items to go into the plant. So we continue to learn, but, we're in the 6th week. I think we'll definitely go through with the operators another couple of weeks and maybe a couple after that. And then I'm hopeful this thing has peaked and we can start letting people come and go and just practice good hygiene after that.
I appreciate the flexibility and adaptability you and your team have shown, because I think with something that's so unknown to all of us, we can't be too rigid, and I think you guys have done a good job of reacting and being flexible. So well done.
Thank you.
And we have a motion to ratify the COVID-19 Emergency Action Plan. Michelle, please take a roll call vote.
Ashbrenner,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
Yes.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Moines.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the CEO selection process. I'd like to start this item that this is a discussion about process. We don't intend to go in closed session, but we'll rely on Rick to keep us out of discussions of individual candidates. Rick, if you can be tuned into that and let us know if we are straying into that territory, and we can either refrain, or if need to, we can close the meeting for discussion. And I have talked to Rick about that process and have that available. I want to give a little bit of recap of where we are. It was about a year since Bill disclosed his illness and there was his subsequent death. We named Ted interim CEO and general manager, and we didn't start an immediate search given the regionalization discussions. Around the end of the year, we reviewed that again and thought we needed to move forward. And in January, we hired a search firm, and a search was commenced. On about April 7th, we received the final candidates from the search firm. They were distributed to members of the board, scored, and ready for next steps. So that's the position that we are in today. But we wanted to have a discussion and say, given the position that we are in with the restrictions from COVID-19, do we want to suspend the search indefinitely until the dangers are past and we can go forward with the traditional search? And when I say traditional search, I mean live interviews, opportunity for public engagement, and those kinds of things. Or do we continue the search with the current field using video conferencing and other tools to complete the search, adapting it to give input from staff, regional partners, others whose opinion we would like to seek on the search, and figure out how we can do that with the constraints that we have during this pandemic. So that's really where we are right now. I guess if we continue the search, I would recommend that we go ahead and narrow the field. We've had candidates who have sought confidentiality. I would assume some because they have current employment. I would suggest that we go through interviews, that we announce the final candidates, add any additional interviews if we are unhappy with the field that we have, or there are others that we would like to interview, then announce the final candidates and arrange for the union, senior staff, maybe representatives of our regional partners, city representatives, to have the opportunity to interview and give feedback, and then make our selection. So that's a lot to digest. But I think we need to start with the question of, can we continue this search?
Diane, this is Andrea. Let's assume that we continue the search, we narrow the field.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea, or does anybody, I should say, does anybody have an idea what the proposed amount of time was between we make a decision, you're hired, and the start date of that individual?
I don't remember that, Andrea.
Okay. I'm just wondering, going through the process, how long are we looking before somebody is officially named? Because I think that may make a difference if we go continue with interviews and the meet and greets, and this person still doesn't come on board until August, versus it's a quicker turnaround or a longer turnaround.
Well, I assume a lot of that would depend on how quickly we go through our steps. You know, once somebody's taken a job, they don't tend to stick around.
Sure.
Yeah, it is.
Where they are.
The same. Like for church services, we try to do a couple of online things.
Is somebody talking? Doug, do you have anything to say about Andrew's question?
Yeah, I think it would really, depend on with that candidate, the finalist that we select, based on their time frame, as being able, if they're relocating from out of state, for instance, that may take a little bit of time. But I think in general, our expectation was that they would probably be on the job within a short amount of time as possible, as far as relocating, if that's the case.
Are you looking for additional comments, Diane?
Yes.
Okay. I know I've had some calls from regional customers saying they're getting a little bit nervous and would sure like to know what direction we're going. So I hope we continue on with the process, narrow it down, and, you know, get as far as we can. Obviously, if someone from out of state cannot come for a final interview because of the COVID thing, you know, then we can take that up. But I think we just stick with the process we'd outlined.
I think we can all agree with my daughter's sentiment that she has shared it repeatedly over the last few weeks, and that she's getting tired of living through a historical event.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree with that. Here are my concerns. We are in an unprecedented time. As we reviewed the COVID-19 action plan that Ted just outlined, and we look into the future, there's so much that's unknown out there. The very state that Des Moines Waterworks might be in the next couple of months is hard for us to predict. But more important, or not more important that, but a complicating factor of that is our inability to conduct the search in the way that we envisioned when we started this process in January. We haven't had the opportunity as a board to sit around and have a discussion like we probably would have had we not been in this situation, to discuss what our individual thoughts were about what we saw we needed in a CEO and general manager, and to have that conversation with employees and union members and members of the community from the outset about what we were looking for. I agree with Colin's comment yesterday that the application process was probably not impacted by this crisis, because most of those applicants submitted applications before our nation started to shut down. But what is impacted is our ability to conduct the interviews and the rest of the search because of this. As Sue mentioned, the ability for people to travel is one thing. Our ability to have those discussions as a board and include other people in the process is definitely impacted, as is just people's attention and ability to participate in this. We could provide many opportunities for people to participate electronically or what have you, but we're at a time period where people don't have the ability to necessarily do that. And so I'm concerned that we're not going to be able to receive the input and conduct the discussion amongst ourselves that we would have otherwise. And then to the final point, because we are in such a time of unknowing what's going to happen next, we get to the point of selecting a candidate, we're all at a disadvantage. The candidate's at a disadvantage, and we at Des Moines Waterworks are at a disadvantage to negotiate a contract. Quite frankly, we don't know what our financial situation is going to be. That the candidate also doesn't know what the future looks like, and so it would be very difficult to have that kind of a negotiation in a meaningful way, which I think would impact the interest of some candidates at this point. So that being said, I mean, I just think that is this situation less than ideal? And I say this situation, if we should decide to at least temporarily suspend the search, is it less than ideal? It absolutely is. This situation that we are all in as a nation is less than ideal. I mean, we all know that there are millions of Americans out of work. There are thousands of Iowans out of work. These are unprecedented times. And as I've stated before, and I will say it 1,000 times, or I hope to say it 1,000 times, I couldn't be more proud of the staff at Des Moines Waterworks and the leadership that Ted has provided during these times. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that we are as in good a shape as we are, and that's to the credit of the people at Des Moines Waterworks. And it would be asking a lot of Ted to ask him to remain in an interim position for a period of time going forward. I get that. We would have to discuss that with Ted. Should we make that a decision to suspend the search? His willingness and ability to stay in an interim position for a while. Knowing Ted, I think he would be up to that task and would understand that. So with that being said, I would like to make a motion, and I would like to move to suspend the search for a CEO and general manager. The board shall discuss the need to restart the search for the CEO and general manager at the June meeting or later. And that would be my motion. And I'll restate it. I move to temporarily suspend the search for a CEO and general manager. The board shall discuss the need to restart the search for the CEO and general manager at the June meeting or a later date.
I'm going to vote against that, and the reason is because
We don't have a second.
We don't have a
We
second
don't
yet.
have a second.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm not hearing a second, Graham.
Could I present a motion?
I believe, and I need to have help here on my Robert's Rules of Order, but I believe the motion dies for lack of a second.
That would be correct.
Thank you.
I would like to make a motion that we narrow the list of candidates down out of fairness, partially based on what Graham said, out of fairness to the candidates, to narrow this field down so at least people know if we are interested in them at this time. I thought it was very telling when Colin mentioned that, chances are if you suspend the search, you'll be starting with a whole new set of candidates. So we all did our rating. So I'd like to see that we narrow it down to a set number and continue on with at least initial interviews in a Zoom format.
Second.
Discussion?
So I do think that it's worthwhile to at least narrow it down. There are clearly some individuals that are just not making the cut, and I think it's fair to let them know that, and to at least identify those that we're willing to have a conversation and explore more. The piece, though, that Graham mentioned that I think deserves some more discussion is that piece of us as a group having a conversation about what we are looking for in a leader, and how that may flush out what our top candidates look like. And I don't know if there's a way to do that as part of the process to move things forward, and if having that conversation would impact anybody's top 3 choices.
Mm-hmm.
And before we go further, I wanted to clarify that I don't think the current motion calls for a vote or decision on the identity or number of final candidates. I think it's simply a question of whether the board is going to proceed to the decision to create a short list.
I seconded with that understanding.
Just like anything
That
else.
was my intent.
Forward. She's been in there too many times.
I had a few
If someone needs to mute their Zoom, we're getting static, and I don't know if it's from people on this call or. Thank you.
I'll add a few thoughts while we've got this on the table. The previous comments are well received and appreciated. I'll just kind of go through some of the factors that I'm weighing as we decide whether or not to move forward. In favor of delaying this and, looking at the unprecedented situation we're in, that, it's easy to see the wisdom and desire to kind of pump the brakes as we are in kind of uncharted waters. We, probably lack the ability to meet some of these candidates in person and look them in the eye. It may, maybe it's limited some of the candidates we've received, although our consultant says he hasn't seen that at all. I agree with Graham. It would be challenging for some members of the public to participate in this. Although, as I think expressed to you, some of you, that I think we can do a lot by working with community groups and the media to make sure people have the opportunity to give their input. And then just the ability of the board to actually kind of sit down together and have discussions about what we're looking for. I mean, we can do that through Zoom or other technology, but I think we all have kind of Zoom fatigue at this point, and there is something to be said for the ability for us to be in the same room together and really engage with this decision and think collectively about it. But on the other hand, I am rather persuaded by how long we have had an interim CEO, and perhaps more importantly, how long we've had one person filling two jobs. It's one thing just to have to bear the interim tag on your title. It's another thing to have Ted doing two jobs at once, and especially in such a critical time when I think we need folks in those leadership positions, both operations and CEO. And I'm rather persuaded by that, and the need to move forward to make sure we fill the organization's leadership ranks and are appropriately staffed there. Additionally, I'd want to learn more about, I think Graham makes some good points, and I'm new enough that I don't fully understand all the ramifications of, how COVID will change the operations of waterworks. Will it have financial implications? We just heard from Ted that revenue remains strong, but will that change in the future? That's something I'd want to learn more about. And I think importantly, I think there's some value in starting the process and moving forward, knowing we can always pull the plug. We've seen other, organizations and city councils in the area do that, start a search process, realize they don't have the candidates they want, or they don't, for whatever reason, they want to start over. We can always start this process, start moving forward, decide that, COVID has thrown too many wrinkles at us and we want to put, hit pause, and we can always hit pause later on. And so those are the factors that I'm weighing, and considering them all, I think there is some wisdom in at least moving forward and seeing, just going through the process. So.
Yeah. I want to talk about Andrea's thoughts about having some kind of discussion of what we're looking for as a leader. When we hired the search firm, Colin sat down with each one of us individually to find out what we were looking for. I'm not sure that we're going to reach a consensus of what we're looking for prior to going out and looking. I don't know if that comes before we have interviews, or if we make sure that the question process is broad enough and inclusive enough that people can ask questions that will get to the kind of person, if that discussion comes once we've had the interviews or before we have the interviews. So I know we all had the discussions with him to say, who are you looking for? What are you looking for as we go forward? So, I don't know. Would it be helpful to have a meeting? Like I said, I'm not sure we would reach consensus? Should we reach consensus in advance of having the interviews?
I think the meeting where we winnow the field and select, you know, a finalist pool to schedule interviews with, I think that's an appropriate time to
have that discussion?
explore, you know, what we, yeah, have that discussion.
So my question is the list, the email that Doug sent out with that highlighting of the various candidates.
Yeah.
Are we using that as our starting point of those are the people that we're going to interview, or are we having a discussion about who we want to interview?
That's a good question. I mean,
I thought we would use that as a tool and come together as a board to determine, to whittle it down. That's why on my motion, I didn't say how many candidates.
Because I think that helps me understand a little bit further, because I was looking at that as, okay, these are the 3 that we interview, in which case I would feel like there's room to have a discussion to, I guess, make your case for other candidates rather than just looking at this and using it as the final say. But like you said, Sue, if this is just a tool to start the discussion, then I think that achieves my goal of having a conversation.
yeah, I get that, Andrea, because, you know, when we did it, there are only being 5 of us. It could be a 3-2.
Yes.
Get some people on the cusp.
I'd also be interested in why some people may have rated a candidate higher than I did, you know, or lower than I did. And I'd be real interested because, you know, maybe there's a reason that there was something on that resume that jumped out.
Yeah, so I think that piece of the process is important. And I think you could start the selection process by saying, you know, our next step is perhaps a Zoom meeting to have that conversation. So that way we are able to whittle it down, like Sue has moved to whatever number that is. And so we're still moving forward. And hopefully by, you know, hopefully very soon we'll be on the other side of this and we have a process and we're halfway through the process of making a selection.
Okay, so we'll have to figure out how to maintain the confidentiality. A number of the candidates are employed, and I'm sure that would not, if they were not a finalist, would not want to have their identity.
Sure. And that does make things tricky.
My understanding is that today we would be agreeing to have a meeting in the near future. And at that meeting, we would go into a closed session and we would discuss and debate which of the candidates we want to make finalists. And then we would ask those finalists, if they haven't already agreed to public disclosure, to tell them, you know, part of being a finalist is that your name is public. So if they haven't agreed to it, then we ask them to at that point, and then we conduct the interviews with them in an open session.
Well, I look at it a little differently. I have one is that we would have that meeting and figure out who we want to interview and us do interviews and then decide if people are finalists. I'm not sure I want to determine finalists based just on paper.
That makes sense. I think part of my motivation is just to make sure enough of the process happens in public view.
Yeah. Well, I would think then once we got our finalists, we would move it into public.
And then a second interview with them in public, or how would?
We could, I don't know, I haven't thought that through.
I'd sure like for us to be able to
go ahead.
Talk about maybe, I'm sorry, Joel, I was talking over you.
Go ahead, please.
I would think when we sit down and narrow this down, we might be able to anticipate what that would look like. Because I think out of fairness to the candidates, we need to tell them, you know, this is an initial screening interview. And then from there, we will determine, you know, what the next steps are, just so we don't get out too far in front of ourselves.
I'd like to go back to Andrea's suggestion, because I think there's a process there that she might have suggested, and I want to make sure I understand it. And that is, the board could come together to have a discussion about expectations, the things we're looking at as a candidate. It is true that we all had individual conversations with Colin, and he recorded some of our thoughts. We've never had that conversation as a group.
Right.
And I think we could benefit by having that conversation as a group. We do have different opinions, and we might learn something that helps us each as individuals make that discussion. And so that discussion, if you will, about the qualities and expectations we would like to see and we would have for the next CEO and general manager, that could be something that is a public meeting, because we're not talking about individual candidates at that point. And I would also hope that we would do our best at that public meeting to ask others for their input, whether it be union leadership and union members, employees, community members, or whomever, to also provide us some input on those qualities and expectations. At the end of that phase of that meeting, we could then go into the closed meeting that you discussed to talk about individual candidates and some of our thoughts that we each had about individual candidates when we provided that ranking to you, Diane, because I don't remember who said it, whether it was Sue said it or Andrea said it, but again, I think we would have an opportunity to learn a little bit from each other about why some of us rated some of the candidates higher than others, and that could be beneficial to us in the process. And so in that closed session, I think we might be able to come to some conclusion about those people that we want to interview and come out of that. So if that makes sense, you know, what I say is we have a public session that goes into a closed session all on the same day.
Rick, I want to make sure, will we be able to go into a closed session to talk about those that we want to interview? I can't.
Sorry, I got to unmute. Yes, I believe you could discuss the qualifications that have been requested be treated confidentially under the open records law.
Okay.
So I think the preliminary discussion as described by Andrea Graham and others would very definitely be open session material, and there wouldn't be a basis for closing that discussion.
Okay.
And then let me ask a process question too. The closed session is somewhat problematic in these days. Zoom is not a secure platform by any means. And so would we conduct the closed session via just a normal conference call?
My vision of that, and there might be a better technical solution, would be to have a standby private conference by Zoom or Microsoft Teams or otherwise, where it was available only to the board members and its selected persons who could be in the closed session. And that would be separate electronically from the open session. So you have your open session, you go into a separate login.
Rick,
Rick
you
is-
froze.
He froze there, but I get what I get what Rick is saying there. And I'll just say it again. This platform of Zoom is not a secure platform, even if you restrict the number of people in the room.
He
And
said,
so,
Graham, they've been using, and I don't know if their Microsoft Office is more secure, but they've been using that.
I'd leave that to a technical person, but you know, and as I say, I would feel comfortable of maybe just a conference call if that's the most secure way, but I think we need to contemplate that.
Okay.
And GoToMeeting is also secure if we do want to have video capabilities, but you're right, Graham, Zoom won't give us the confidentiality.
Yeah, it's a great platform unless you want it to be private.
But it sounds like there's a way, with all this discussion, it sounds like there's a way to move things forward, allowing for some time and some intentionality in how we are making this selection.
Yep.
So I
If
don't
I could-
remember what the motion is that's on the table, and I might suggest whatever it is, maybe it be amended to outline a potential meeting process.
Well, I think a friendly amendment, Graham, if you want to make a friendly amendment to that, saying that there would be
Well,
Hey.
remind me of what the motion is. I don't even remember.
the motion
I
is.
think that, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
the,
Go
the
ahead.
gist was to proceed with the search and this recruitment and process to hire. I'm sorry if I interrupted, Sue.
No, that's fine. Graham, did you want to make a friendly amendment to the motion, which was
No,
to?
I don't. I'm not going to make the amendment because I'm going to vote against it. So if somebody wants to insert that, that would be fine.
I move that we amend the motion to state that we'll hold a public meeting in the near future to discuss the board's desired qualifications of a new CEO and to potentially go into closed session to discuss the merits of candidates who have requested confidentiality.
And Joel, just to clarify, that meeting then is a public meeting, correct? The first
My
meeting.
understanding of kind of what we've discussed here, and I think that was, I think, Graham's suggestion, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
And I just want to be clear, we start public meeting to talk about desired qualifications, expectations. We potentially move into a closed session to discuss the applicants in order to winnow the field.
Yes.
And let me just say, and I think this is probably obvious, but just to be clear and it's on the record, I'm going to vote against this motion. I'm going to vote against this motion because I think it is a mistake for us to move forward in these troubled times with this search. And I think it's a mistake. The reason I think it's a mistake is because the ability for people to participate fully in this process, whether it's employees, again, union members, the community, our potential partners in regionalization, their opportunity is limited and will be limited for the foreseeable future.
Okay, we have a motion.
If I can add just one more comment quickly, sorry, and not this, Graham, not a rebuttal to you by any means, but just a note that I forgot to mention earlier. I think one of my main, I guess, motivating factors here is we just don't know when these troubled times are going to end, and could be 6 months, it could be 3 years, God forbid, and it just doesn't seem like there is calm water on the horizon, and so I think we've got to move forward as best we can in this kind of new normal that we are living in. So that was one of my.
Okay,
And I get that, Joel. I guess my question on that point, though, is that
Graham, we have a motion.
I realize we have a motion. I think we're having a discussion, are we not?
Can we?
I'm sorry, I interrupted that.
We have a motion to proceed with the search and in the near future to hold a meeting to talk about desired qualifications and expectation. That meeting would be public with the followed potentially by a closed session to look at the applicant list to narrow the field for to move forward for interviews. Is that a fair statement of the motion? Is there a second? Is that, Sue, that's your motion?
I accepted Joel's comment as a friendly amendment, so yes.
Okay.
I'll second if I can. I know I made the amendment, so I don't know if that is
I
appropriate.
can go on record of seconding it.
Okay, now discussion.
Thank you. Joel, my question is, and maybe it's a rhetorical question, but the one that I have unresolved in my mind is, yes, we're in troubled times, and yes, I understand that we don't know when this ends. The question is, why do we have to move forward now? I mean, it's just this, we have a very good team in place. We have a very solid interim leader in place. With all that's unknown, I don't understand the urgency of moving forward with this now.
Well, one of the reasons I would like to move forward is to show our regional customers that we are moving forward, just as we had outlined in January that we would. I have heard from at least 3 of them that they're getting a little bit nervous as to why we're taking so long. And, you know, everyone understands what's going on in the world, but I think what we've arrived at here is a nice, happy medium. And I look forward to us getting this next meeting scheduled.
I think, Sue, I mean, I think the reason that we're not, we wouldn't move forward is the same reason we haven't moved forward with regional discussions since March. We're unable to meet as a group. We're unable to have those regional discussions. We're not moving forward with the regional discussions because we're in a global pandemic. And I realize the mayor of Ankeny thinks he runs Des Moines Waterworks or would like to, but we're not in a position to do that now. And I think that people understand that and should understand that. And if they don't, they're welcome to move forward with our regional discussions too, which they're unable to do.
Well, our Des Moines mayor, I mean, I know what you're saying. It's not Gary Burns. I was thinking more about our Des Moines mayor has called a couple of times. And I'm sure he's talked to some of you. He just wants to know where we are in the process and make sure that we continue to move ahead. I think Mayor County is very much behind regionalization, and he doesn't want this to be an excuse for anyone to say, what are they doing over there? So.
Are you ready to vote on the motion? I think Michelle will take a roll call vote.
Ashburn,
Yes.
Bolton,
Yes.
Gillette,
No.
Hubbard,
Yes.
Moines.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is information items, board committee reports. Planning committee.
So you all heard one of our main items on the planning committee agenda from this month, and that was the update of the Scada. Is that the correct way to say that?
Scada, I think would be.
Scada, which I would just like to point out, it is pretty mind-blowing to understand how everything was managed prior to having that system in place. So it's appreciated to see the work that's being done to move ahead with getting that updated. And then the other item was to share the sorry, I'm scrolling through my packet right now to make sure that I say the EPA water, sorry, can somebody help me out with exactly what that report is called, that we're also updating to make sure that we are prepared for any type of risk in the future.
Right, Andrea, that's exactly right. It's our vulnerability assessment.
Vulnerability assessment, thank you.
Required by America's Water Infrastructure Act.
Which is also, I was not aware that is what that was or what all that entailed, but that was also very interesting to see what they consider vulnerable points in our system. So I appreciate that presentation that was shared, and I'm sure is available to others if they're interested. But with that, I'll, Joel or Ted, if you have anything else to add.
No, I think that was a good summary.
Thank you. Graham, the Finance and Audit Committee.
I am not going to try to summarize this. I'll let Ted or Peggy do it. We had a great conversation about rate restructuring, which I really appreciated, and that there's a lot of work that's gone into this. And so, as I say, I'm not going to try to summarize it. Ted, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Graham. We had a very good presentation from Raftellus that kind of summed up the work that they have done and some basics on rate setting philosophy. And Peggy, I think if you want to add some context to some of the recommendations, just briefly, that might be of value to the group.
Sure. You know, the crux really of Raftellis's presentation was pointing out that, you know, under our current purchase capacity rate structure, those who, well, first of all, those who don't use any water aren't paying anything, obviously, but and what that means is they're also not paying for the ongoing maintenance of those assets and the capital maintenance of those assets. You know, there's maintenance on both sides of it. So, but even the ones who are buying water, depending upon how their, what their buying behavior is, they aren't necessarily paying their full share. And when Raftellus does analysis on a cost of service basis, the purchase capacity customer class is not paying their share of the cost. Within that class, some are paying a higher percentage of their share of cost than others, so there's a disparity within the group, and that's why it's not just an issue of, oh, well, let's raise the purchase capacity rate and make it so that they're paying their share of costs. The very different customer characteristics within the group means if you do that, some would be overpaying. So their recommendation is moving towards a two-part rate, let's put it that way, for purchase capacity customers, with a larger, more component that covers the capital costs, and it would be based on X amount per MGD of their peak in the, you know, prior 3-year average, or however we decide. You know, those are details to be worked out, but some prior peak, and then still a volume rate, and that will spread the cost more appropriately across the members of the group, and allow us to collect the appropriate amount of cost from the group. So I think the Finance and Audit Committee, you know, agreed with that kind of basic premise. It wasn't a formal rate recommendation, but a basic premise to move forward. And so we will move forward with that, as far as we have some internal discussions that we need to have first, and then some subsequent meetings with staff, with Raftellus, before we would bring them back to Finance and Audit with some more detailed recommendations.
Can you talk for a second? Because I think the Finance and Committee was very interested in next steps, if I remember correctly. And you've talked about staff and Raftellus, but I think we're also interested in thinking on how we begin to educate our wholesale customers.
Yeah, we really have two pieces of cost of service and rate work going on concurrently. And one of those, the other side of that is the cost of service study that then the model that Raftellus reworked for us also really necessitated a recreation of a cost of service report that we provide to our customers, both wholesale and full service customers. And so we have been working with Raftellus over the last couple months on several drafts of that report. I've lost track of what number we're on right now. And we are nearing completion of that, and some sort of then presentation by Raftellus about on that report, which really gets to the underlying, you know, cost of service theory and the model that they created, which points towards the fact that that class is being undercollected. So that's kind of the basis, the underlying educational basis, and then moving forward with actual rate design.
Any questions?
No, but you know, the part that, I mean, I know we've been through this before and it was so good to see it a second time, but it made me realize which regional customers we really shouldn't be all that concerned about and which ones we should be.
In terms of who's paying their cost of service, yeah,
And which ones we're carrying.
right.
Yeah. Anything additional? Thank you for that work. Customer relations. We didn't have a meeting, did we?
We did not.
No.
Bill Stowe Memorial Committee.
There's nothing new there. As I said at the last meeting, we will reconvene at a later date.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden Board.
All I'll say about that is they continue to tread water like most of us. They did receive PPP for their employee salaries and hourly workers, and so that's good news there. They also, thanks to the Ruan family, are moving forward with the Ruan Garden, which is the second phase of the botanical garden, and so that's good news.
Thank you. The Waterworks Park Foundation Board. I know the minutes are attached, but anything further?
I think between Ted's discussion of concerts being canceled and the minutes, that should cover it.
Any questions? Yes, I was so sad on the Willie Nelson concert being canceled.
You and me both.
Yeah. Government outreach, the legislative session is suspended. Ted, on 2020 utility goals.
Yeah, real quick, Diane, before we do that, Michelle, could you jump to page 71 and just, I wanted to show you the calendar and just, this is the park calendar. It's in the packet, but you can see, whoops, we lost it.
Sorry.
Here. Yeah.
You can see the number of things that have been canceled or postponed. There's really nothing left in April or early May. And Willie Nelson, as Diane just said, June 2nd. He canceled his whole tour though, so that's done. So we don't really have anything on the calendar until sort of mid-May. They're being hopeful, but I don't know if we're going to make it through that. And then it's out to July till we have any concerts scheduled, and we'll see if we make those or not. But we're going to try to continue to keep this calendar up to date and bring it to you each month so you can see it. The utility goals. In January, we brought 4 stated goals to the board. First quarter update here. The customer information system, our goal is to go live with that, including some of the major additional features, Clevis, which is our field system, Invoice Cloud, and Backflow. All of those things are actually moving along fairly effectively. The team is able to do a lot of what they do through remote meetings, and they're making good progress. The ultimate goal is the end of the year, basically, but they're making good progress, and that goal is certainly on track at this point. The second goal relates to the wholesale rate design, which we just talked about, or Peggy just talked about. We're moving forward with that. We've had the presentation from Raftellus. Peggy and Amy and I know have a meeting tomorrow afternoon, in fact, to kind of talk through exactly how we're going to proceed with the next steps and talk about the cost of service report, which I think Raftellus has done a great job of telling us what they've done. The why they did it is what we're trying to work on and flesh out so that wholesale customers can understand that. But the goal, as stated, is certainly on track. Lead water service line, we had a goal to do a number of things in anticipation of updates to the lead and copper rule coming out. It's not clear yet whether those revisions are going to come out or not, but the team is working on updating our lead service line inventory, getting better keys to help us or clues to help us understand where we may have lead service lines. We have a general sense, but we're trying to refine that. And we're also trying to include an interactive map in our new website design that would allow customers to go online and see if they had lead service line or not, which will inform the customer information process that is a part of the requirements of the new rule. So that is also on track. From an injury perspective or a safety perspective, our goal was 6 or fewer recordable injuries this year, which would be half, about 50% of the industry average for a utility our size. We began the year with Central Safety identifying strains as the injury area of focus that they wanted to address this year. And a lot of good work was done there. A couple of important initiatives. We actually had a physical therapist who came to a number of the department's work groups and worked with them and helped them understand the risks and how to protect themselves. The thing that I was really impressed with the most was the daily stretching programs that started in numerous departments across the utility. Every day, groups of folks were getting together and stretching in the garage areas or in open areas of their department, and it was really taking hold. And then, of course, pandemic interfered with all of that, and that's been suspended. But good things were happening. Unfortunately, in terms of the actual goal, we've had 3 recordable injuries to date, which is half of what we're hoping to have no more than this year. So right now we're not on track with that goal, but we're still hopeful and we're focused. And the safety team is already meeting and discussing how do we move forward in pandemic America with our safety programs. So that's it.
Any questions for Tad? Thank you. Are there any questions on the contract status spreadsheet or the lien certifications and reversals? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everybody.
Thanks all.